Fraldorian Empire assembled its forces. Endless fleets hovered like schools of armored leviathans, bristling with turrets and neon scars of past conquests. Here, the War Council convened, 13 alien species, bound by a mutual hatred of one shared enemy. Humans, or so they thought. Joran Vels tightened the seals of his battered exosuit, the servos humming softly at each joint. At 29, he was considered old among the new generation of Earth's frontier soldiers, those born under low-gravity, deep space conditions. His body was lean and wiry, every movement economical, bred from a life where waste meant death. His eyes, a piercing steel gray, surveyed the sprawling docking bay around him. Half-assembled carriers floated on magnetic cranes. Weapon pods were snapped into place by skeletal repair drones. The scent of ozone and burnt composite hung heavy in the recycled air. This was Outpost Sigma 9, humanity's last real foothold in the expanse. Officially, it was classified as minimal strategic value by the Union Council back home. Unofficially, it was bait, and Joran Vels was the hook. He knelt beside a squat figure adjusting a cluster of tiny mech frames, each no larger than a child's toy. They were painted dull gray, barely noticeable against the hangar floor. Standard scout drones at a glance. But if you knew what to look for, the reinforced plating and human-sized weapon mounts told another story. "You sure they'll laugh?" Joran asked, voice low, half amused. The squat figure looked up. Lieutenant Karam Mendez, tactical engineer and saboteur, grinned with feral delight. Her dark hair was shaved close on one side, a messy braid falling over her other shoulder. "They'll roar," she said, patting one of the mechs affectionately. "They won't just underestimate us. They'll mock us. It's in their nature." Joran's lip curled. He hated relying on the enemy's arrogance, but damn if it didn't work. In theory, a harsh crackle buzzed over the comms. "Vels, report to ops." Joran rose, armor plates flexing. His boots clanked heavily as he made his way through the maze of half-prepared defenses. Every step he took felt like a countdown ticking towards something massive, something inevitable. The others in the bay, the handful of techs, gunners, and mech pilots, glanced up briefly. Most nodded, some offered wry smirks. It was a silent ritual, a soldier's prayer. "Good luck, brother. Hope you come back breathing." Joran pushed through the armored blast doors and entered ops. A domed chamber filled with holographic projectors and battle-scar consoles. Its ceiling projected a real-time image of the surrounding expanse. Fleets like cancerous growths spread across the stars. And there, an ominous crimson mark pulsed, a Fraldorian warhost flagship, Viacorin, and its escorts. Seated at the main console was Commander Auric Dane, a mountain of a man with silvered temples and a voice like gravel, scraping steel. "They're biting," Dane said without preamble. He flicked a finger, and a tactical map flared to life. Scout relays confirm. Fraldorian warhost entering Sigma's kill zone. Full armada. Looks like they brought every cousin and cousin's dog. Joran whistled low. "All that for little old us." Dane barked a laugh. "Correction, for your tiny army." The name was a running joke, started by an alien broadcast after humans first deployed the miniature mech units. The galactic media had a field day. Pathetic human desperation, the captions had read. Earth forces resort to toys and insects. And maybe, Joran thought grimly, that was true at first. The first iterations had been prototypes, half-baked, glitch-prone. But they weren't prototypes anymore. He tapped the control pad on his forearm. A nearby wall screen shimmered to life, revealing a cluster of mech suits shifting into formation. Despite their size, they moved with uncanny precision. Each one was manned by a soldier, real, breathing, furious humans compressed into compact exoframes, faster and deadlier than the enemy could imagine. "They think it's unmanned tech," Joran muttered. "And they'll think that right until the moment the breathing stops in their lungs," Dane replied grimly. He turned toward Joran, eyes hard. "You're sure about this plan?" "No," Joran admitted, a flash of teeth. "But it's the only one we've got." Dane grunted. He thumbed a control switch, and across the station, emergency red lights began flashing in sequence. Evac protocols initiated. Everyone except essential strike teams and command staff would abandon Sigma 9. The enemy would assume it was fear, desertion, collapse. Perfect bait. You and your tinies will deploy inside the debris fields, Dane said. You'll be invisible on sensors. When they move in for the kill, you gut them from the inside. Jor nodded. Business as usual. But even he could feel the tension coiling tighter than usual. The Fraldorians weren't known for mercy. If they realized the deception early, if they detected the soldiers inside the matches, they'd unleash every nightmare in their arsenal. And no one was coming to save them. Dane clapped him once on the shoulder, a soldier's blessing, and turned back to ops. The signal was clear, dismissed. Make your peace. Joran returned to the hangar. Kara met him with a raised brow. Showtime? She asked. Showtime. They moved fast. Within 20 minutes, the first platoon was packed into launch tubes. Dozens of miniature assault mech sealed inside pods that would fire them into the cluttered wreckage fields outside Sigma. No grand speeches. No heroic farewells. Just the cold efficiency of soldiers who knew the odds were worse than bad. Joran strapped himself into his own frame, a heavier model called the Wasp, and felt the familiar click hum of the neural interface linking to his mind. His vision sharpened, sounds dimmed to clinical awareness. His body wasn't just his anymore. It was steel, it was purpose. All units, confirm ready, came Kara's voice over the shared net. One by one, the call signs sounded off. Tiny, almost pathetic in the vastness of space. Until you knew what rode inside them. Joran exhaled slowly as the countdown started flashing across his HUD. 10 on 8. Let's give them something to laugh about, he said. A sharp tone rocked the pod as the launch engaged. Joran was slammed back into his harness as the stars blurred past his canopy. Through narrow viewports, he saw dozens of similar pods hurtling with him, a scattershot of deadly seeds into the void. They punched into the debris field, a jagged nightmare of shattered frigates and rusted husks. Gravity wells twisted inconsistently, slinging fragments across invisible currents. Perfect cover. His pod slammed into a floating engine block, magnetic clamps engaging. With a hiss, the hatch blew open. Joran unlatched and stepped out onto the surface. His boots touched steel. His heart touched war. And just as his squad began deploying around him, their suits shifting into lethal battle forms, the long-range scanners lit up with a new contact. Multiple contacts. Hundreds. Thousands. Bigger than they'd anticipated. Joran's stomach knotted as he realized. The Fraldorians hadn't just brought a war host. They brought a full crusade. And humanity's tiny army was the only thing standing in their way. The briefing room aboard the Ascendant buzzed with uneasy murmurs as the War Council convened. Arlen sat stiffly in his seat, hands clasped behind his back, absorbing the distrustful glances of the alien commanders around him. Fleet Marshal Trevik of the Athari, a tall being with crystalline skin that shimmered under the light, leaned forward, voice dripping skepticism. You expect us to deploy that against the Carthan Horde? He gestured disdainfully at the holographic display of the human units, tiny compared to the towering alien warriors surrounding them. Arlen rose to his feet calmly. He wore no ostentatious medals, no flamboyant insignia, just a simple black uniform with a patch of earth stitched over the heart. His presence, however, carried a weight no fabric could confer. You asked for a solution, Arlen said evenly. We're it. There was a ripple of derisive laughter. Trevik sneered. The Horde's lightest infantry is 5 times your size. Their mechs can crush a human in a single stride. Are we supposed to believe you'll turn the tide? Arlen didn't flinch. He tapped the side of the console, pulling up footage. Not simulations, recorded battles. Grainy clips of humans in battered armor darting between monstrous enemies, planting explosives, sniping pilots from open cockpits, outmaneuvering towering juggernauts with cunning and ferocity unmatched. They expect strength, Arlen said quietly. They expect brute force. They do not expect what we are. The room fell into a tense silence. The alien commanders stared at the footage, watched humans take down foes 10 times their mass with improvised traps, coordinated strikes, and raw, ruthless creativity. Trevik scoffed, but the confidence behind it had dulled. "And what happens," he said, "when they adapt? When they stop underestimating you?" "We'll adapt faster," Arlen said. In the end, they agreed, grudgingly, to deploy the human battalions in the coming offensive. If nothing else, they reasoned, the tiny soldiers could serve as distractions. After the meeting, as the council dispersed in muttering knots, Arlen retreated to the human staging grounds deeper within the ship. The contrast was staggering. Where the aliens favored towering halls and cavernous bays, the human sector was compact, efficient, buzzing with restrained energy. Rows of human soldiers drilled in tight formations, their smaller exosuits moving with liquid precision. Their armor wasn't bulky like the alien mechs. It was lithe, reactive, designed not for direct confrontation, but for agility, for guile. Arlen passed Lieutenant Sheriff Vance, running a squad through a series of breach-and-clear drills. She caught his eye and jogged over, her helmet tucked under one arm, a smirk playing at the edge of her mouth. "Let me guess," Sheriff said. "The Giants aren't impressed with their new toys?" Arlen allowed himself a rare smile. "Not yet. Good. It's more fun when they don't see it coming." He nodded toward the field, where recruits ran obstacle courses peppered with live-fire challenges. "How are they shaping up?" "Fast learners." "Hard heads," Sheriff said, pride evident. "We've got one hell of a pack, Colonel." "Good," Arlen said, "because they're sending us in first." Sheriff's smirk widened. "They think we're cannon fodder. They'll think differently soon enough." They moved through the training yards, inspecting gear, checking systems. The soldiers were young, but not green. Every one of them had fought before, on the wastelands of Elter Prime, in the jungles of Voss 9, on the ruins of Earth's lost colonies. These were not soldiers bred in academies of prestige. They were survivors. Fighters who understood that size meant little when your mind was sharper, your will stronger, and your heart willing to face the impossible. That evening, Arlen gathered the company. 1,000 human soldiers, standing at attention beneath the stars visible through the ship's transparent hangar bay. He stood on a platform before them, voice amplified by the intercom. "I won't waste your time with speeches," he said. "You already know what they think of us. You've seen the smirks. Heard the laughter. In their eyes, we are small, insignificant." He let the words hang for a moment. A faint murmur ran through the ranks. Not anger, not resentment, but a simmering, focused fury. Arlen continued. "Good. Let them think that. Let them think we are weak, that we are nothing. And when the time comes, when the Carthan look down on us and see only insects," he leaned forward, voice dropping to a growl, "make them fear the sting." The human soldiers slammed their fists to their chests as one, a thunderous impact that echoed through the hangar like the crack of a world splitting open. The first target was a Carthan forward bastion, a towering fortress of blackened steel, bristling with plasma cannons and shield arrays. It was designed to repel sieges from fleets. Nothing larger than a carrier was expected to even dent it. The human battalions, inserted by stealth dropships, weren't meant to dent it. They were meant to unravel it from within. Under cover of darkness, they slipped onto the outer platforms, minuscule shapes darting across the massive infrastructure like ants across a battleship's hull. The Carthan defenders barely noticed at first. Sensors tuned to detect capital ships, mass troop movements, and gravitational distortions simply ignored the tiny anomalies. Arlen led a Skyad personally through the maintenance ducts, planting disruptors that crippled shield generators. Shera's team took the control tower, hacking into systems with jury-rigged tech and sheer audacity. Explosions blossomed across the fortress like flares. Internal security systems fired on their own generators. Defensive cannons locked onto phantom signals. By the time the Carthan realized they were under attack, chaos reigned. Arlen stood atop a catwalk overlooking the main reactor bay as alarms howled and fires raged. He keyed his comms. Phase 2. Hit them hard. All across the fortress, human squads surged. They weren't attacking head-on. They were disabling, disorienting, dismantling. 1,000 precise strikes where 1,000,000 tons of warship bombardment would have failed. The Carthan forces scrambled, massive brutes in powered armor lumbering through corridors too tight for their size. They couldn't catch the humans. They couldn't predict them. Every time they adapted, the humans changed tactics again, faster, leaner, more brutal. Arlen ducked behind a power conduit as a Carthan soldier, for times his height, thundered past. He slid a charge under the alien's armor plating and dove away as the explosion shredded the giant's knee joint. By the time dawn rose over the smoldering ruins, the bastion had fallen, not to armadas or siege cannons, but to 1,000 tiny, indomitable soldiers who refused to fight on anyone's terms but their own. The alien commanders watched the aftermath in stunned silence. Trevik stood stiffly at the bridge window, mouth slightly open, crystalline fingers tapping nervously against his side. "They took it," he whispered. "Without a fleet." The Athari admiral turned to his aide, voice shaking slightly. How many human casualties?" The aide scanned the reports. 27 wounded. No deaths. Trevik stared at the data in disbelief. 27 wounded, against a Carthan fortress that had held against full fleets for months. In the silence that followed, a slow, cold realization dawned across the alien coalition. The tiny army wasn't a joke. It was a storm, and it was just beginning. Victory should have been a moment of triumph. Instead, it was met with dread. Less than a day after the fall of the Carthan bastion, new readings came through the coalition scanners. Movement. But not from the fortress. From deep space. From beyond the known systems. Arlen stood before the tactical display in the war room as the data scrolled faster than any aide could keep up with. Shara was at his side, her brow furrowed, lips pressed into a thin line. The Carthan horde wasn't retreating. It was evolving. "What are we looking at?" Arlen demanded, voice calm but tight. Fleet Marshal Trevik, now far less dismissive, answered grimly. "They've awakened to pre-march." The entire room stiffened. Even the most battle-hardened alien officers paled visibly. On the holo-display, a colossal shape coalesced, a mass the size of a small moon, cloaked in writhing metallic tendrils, radiating an energy signature so dense it warped gravity itself. The Primarchs were thought to be extinct, Trevik said, voice low. Weapons of the old Carthan Empire. Biomechanical titans bred not just to fight, but to end civilizations. Shara swore under her breath. Arlen said nothing, but his jaw tightened. The coalition had prepared for war against soldiers, even against Carthan war machines. They had not prepared to fight a god of annihilation. Emergency councils convened. Theories were thrown across the chambers. Most of them panicked, desperate. Some wanted to flee to the inner systems and abandon the front entirely. Others spoke of building a sacrificial wall, sacrificing colonies to slow the beast's advance. In the center of the chaos, Arlen stood silent, thinking, calculating, feeling that dangerous clarity that always came before something irreversible. "We can't beat that thing head-on," Shara said later, pacing inside the human command tent. "Even if every fleet in the galaxy rallied right now, it would take weeks to muster them. We have days. Maybe. We're not beating it head-on," Arlen said. His voice was low, almost reflective. "We're going inside." Shara froze mid-pace. "Inside? You mean board it?" Arlen nodded slowly. He pulled up schematics, old, fragmentary records from the ancient wars. Details about the Primarchs. Their systems. Their weak points. If they even had any. "The Primarchs are part organic," he said. "Their cores aren't just mechanical. They're alive. Which means they can be killed," Shara finished, eyes widening. Arlen allowed himself the barest ghost of a smile. "Exactly. But how the hell do you even reach the core of something that size?" "We do what humans have always done when faced with something impossible," Arlen said, his eyes hard as steel. "We find a crack and pry it open." 2 nights later, the humans launched. While the coalition fleets engaged the pre-march in a suicidal feint, the human battalions slipped into the shadows again. Stealth corvettes raced across the void, weaving through tendrils of antimatter energy and gravitational distortions so powerful they tore lesser ships apart. Arlen's team, only 300 strong, reached the Primarch's outer hull. The surface was a nightmare. Pulsing, semi-organic plates fused with blackened armor, shifting and flexing as if the beast could feel them crawling upon it. But humans were small, fast, unnoticed. They planted charges, carving entry points, slipping into the Primarch's labyrinthine guts. Inside, the landscape was even worse. Tunnels of sinew and wire, rivers of molten plasma, vast chambers where mechanical organs throbbed and shrieked. And everywhere, defenses, immune responses like living machines, tentacled horrors that lashed out blindly at any invader. Arlen led from the front, pulse rifle crackling as he took down a scuttling sentry. Shara covered their flank, barking orders to the demolition teams. They fought their way toward the core. Every step was a brutal gauntlet. Every hallway could collapse or mutate at any moment. Time bled into a blur of fire and screams and relentless motion. And then, finally, they reached it. The core chamber. It floated in the center of a cavern the size of a city. An orb of seething energy, half mechanical, half organic, protected by a lattice of living tendrils thicker than battleships. Arlen stared for a breathless moment. This wasn't just technology. It was will, a mind, a hatred so ancient and deep it had outlived entire civilizations. He keyed his calm, set the charges. They knew they wouldn't survive. Even if the charges worked, the blast radius would engulf them all. But Arlen's voice was steady. If we don't stop this thing, there won't be anyone left to remember we existed. Shara clapped a hand on his shoulder, grinning fiercely despite the sweat and blood on her face. One hell of a way to be remembered. The teams moved, planting nuclear cores, overloading reactor spikes. The core howled as if sensing its imminent death, the entire pre-march shuddering around them. But just as the last charge was armed, the ground split open beneath them. A guardian erupted from the floor, a creature of living armor and bladed limbs, more massive than any human mech. It struck with terrifying speed, impaling 2 soldiers instantly, scattering the rest. Arlen barely dodged a sweeping claw. He rolled to his feet, firing uselessly at the thing's impenetrable hide. Normal weapons wouldn't stop it. And worse, the Guardian was moving toward the planted charges, toward the detonation matrix. If it disrupted even one, the whole mission would fail. Arlen made a decision without hesitation. He sprinted, straight at the monster. Shara screamed his name, but he didn't falter. He leapt, dodged, climbed the beast's writhing form like a man scaling a collapsing tower. At the highest point, he ripped open a maintenance hatch, revealing a tangled nest of control fibers, and jammed his plasma rifle into the heart of it. The creature convulsed. Arlen triggered the overload. The plasma cell went critical in seconds, detonating in a flare of white-hot energy. The Guardian collapsed, dead, but Arlen was nowhere to be seen. The humans finished arming the charges, faces grim, hearts heavy. They sprinted for the extraction point, knowing they might not even outrun the coming explosion. As they retreated, Shara looked back once, toward the broken giant, toward where Arlen had fallen, and she whispered under her breath, "We will not waste your sacrifice." The Primarch's death scream echoed across the stars, and humanity's legend of small, unstoppable warriors blazed even brighter. The Primarch's death scream tore across space like a psychic thunderclap. Ships shuddered in orbit. Entire battalions on the ground fell to their knees, clutching their heads. The coalition fleets, locked in desperate combat against the Primarch's vanguard forces, faltered in confusion and terror. But amid the chaos, the human forces stayed sharp, focused, relentless. The charges detonated in perfect sequence. From the heart of the pre-march, a shockwave of light exploded outward, slicing through its impossible mass like wildfire through dry grass. Tendrils snapped, core systems unraveled. The massive Titan, this engine of extinction, began to crumble from the inside out. Inside the labyrinthine guts, Shara and the survivors ran for their lives. Walls collapsed. Gravity twisted. Rivers of molten energy burst free, flooding the tunnels. Shara risked one look back. The core chamber was gone now, consumed in a maelstrom of energy and debris. And somewhere in that devastation, Arlen's body lay. Gone. Her throat tightened, but she forced herself onward. Not just for him, for everything he fought for. Outside, the Coalition fleets watched as the impossible happened. The pre-march, the terror of 1,000 lost civilizations, was dying. A starburst of radiant destruction tore its body apart, piece by piece, flinging broken tendrils across space like dying screams. The Coalition soldiers on the ground, human and alien alike, erupted into cheers so fierce they seemed to shake the very earth. Ships in orbit fired in triumph, emptying their cannons into the wounded remnants, hastening the monster's collapse. For the first time in generations, hope flooded the galaxy, because humanity had done what no one else dared to believe possible. They had killed a pre-march. In the aftermath, the surviving human teams returned to Coalition lines. Shara staggered from the dropship, armor scorched and battered, blood streaking her face. She didn't hear the cheers at first, didn't see the salutes from alien officers who, days before, wouldn't have even acknowledged her, didn't feel the dozens of hands clapping her back. All she could feel was the empty space where Arlen had been. Fleet Marshal Trevik himself approached, flanked by other ranking commanders, some alien, some human. His face was grim, but when he spoke, his voice rang out across the gathered ranks. Against every expectation, against every calculation, the humans have done what we could not. He turned to Shara and the battered survivors. You have proven that humanity is not merely a footnote in galactic history. You are its saviors. The Coalition forces roared their approval, the sound echoing across the blasted plains. But Shara barely nodded. Victory tasted bitter without Arlen there to see it. That night, they held a funeral under the broken sky. No grand parades, no empty speeches, just a circle of survivors, human and alien alike, standing silent as a crude memorial was built from shattered metal and battered banners. At the center, Shara placed Arlen's service patch, burnt and torn but still recognizable. She didn't cry. There were no tears left in her. Instead, she stood at attention, raised her fist to her heart, and whispered the words every human soldier knew by heart. Until the stars burned cold, brother. The others echoed her. Voices from 100 different worlds, speaking in unity. Until the stars burned cold. A promise. A memory. A legend. Weeks passed. The Carthan horde, leaderless and shattered, crumbled before the Coalition's advance. Worlds once darkened by their shadow bloomed with life again. Cities were rebuilt. New alliances were forged. The galaxy, for the first time in living memory, dared to dream of peace. And through it all, the story of a human vanguard spread like wildfire. Songs were written. Statues were raised. Even alien children learned the names of Arlen Cross and the brave few who had boarded a god and brought it down. But there was one final twist still to come. One evening, while reviewing scattered reports of surviving Carthan cells, Shara's calm crackled to life. An encrypted signal. Faint, distorted, but undeniably human. She sat bolt upright, heart hammering. The encryption signature, it was Arlen's. Without hesitation, she rerouted every satellite in range, traced the signal to a barren world deep in the wreckage zone. Within hours, she was aboard a dropship, screaming through the atmosphere toward the source. The surface was a nightmare. Craters, wreckage, twisted metal forests. But the beacon was clear. Near a broken fragment of the Primarch's carcass, they found a small survival pod, barely functional, jury-rigged from scavenged parts. Inside, Arlen Cross, alive, barely conscious, half buried in debris, burned, broken but alive. When Shara knelt beside him, he cracked one bloodied eye open and gave her the faintest, crooked smile. Told you, he rasped. Humans don't die easy. She laughed, a raw, broken sound that shook with relief, and punched his shoulder gently. "You damn stubborn bastard," she whispered. Behind them, the sun rose over the wreckage of the pre-march. A new day for a new galaxy. A day born of sacrifice, courage, and the indomitable spirit of humanity. Recovery was slow. Arlen's body had been pushed beyond any reasonable limits. Bones had knitted wrong. Skin grafts clung stubbornly. He spent weeks floating in medical suspension, his mind half drifting, half dreaming. But he lived, and when he finally rose from the medical bay, still bruised, still limping, the entire coalition fleet saluted him. Not just the humans, all of them. On the shattered plains of what was once pre-march space, they held a ceremony unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. No single flag flew. No anthem dominated. Instead, soldiers and civilians from 100 species stood side by side, heads bowed in respect. At the center of it all stood Arlen Cross and Shara Mendez, armor polished, their human flags stitched proudly to their sleeves. Fleet Marshal Trevik spoke first, his voice broadcast across systems, reaching every corner of liberated space. "We gathered this army, believing humans were a desperate gamble. A tiny force thrown against the darkness, more symbolic than strategic." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. But humanity did what none of us expected. They bled. They fought. They endured when reason said they should not. And because they would not yield, we stand here free. A murmur rippled through the gathered masses. Some wiped tears from their faces. Others stood straighter, chests swelling with newfound pride. Trevik turned then, facing Arlen and Shara directly. "You are not tiny. You are titans in spirit, and the galaxy will never forget." He reached forward and pinned a new insignia to Arlen's battered armor, a silver flame encircled by stars. The newly christened Order of the Unyielding, the highest honor the Coalition had ever created, awarded, for the first time, to humans. And when the ceremony ended, something extraordinary happened. One by one, soldiers from other species stepped forward. A HFY Velen captain offered the traditional blade of respect from his people. A Zervathi elder draped a ceremonial chain across Shara's shoulders, signifying eternal alliance. Even the cold, logic-driven Shisari archivists recorded humanity's deeds into the stellar annals, normally reserved for recording the birth and death of entire civilizations. Shara and Arlen exchanged a glance. Without speaking, they understood. This was no longer just survival. This was legacy. Months later, the true rebuilding began. The Coalition, once fractured and suspicious, now rallied behind a new council. One where humans held permanent seats. Not as pawns, not as figureheads, as equals. New colonies sprang up across the scarred regions. Ships bearing the Terran Star and Coalition emblems ferried supplies, settlers, and teachers. Where once the galaxy saw humans as desperate scavengers, it now saw pioneers, architects of peace. On the ruins of the Carthan's former stronghold, the Pact of the Shattered Star was signed. A treaty binding the free worlds together with a vow stronger than trade or necessity. We will stand together. We will bleed together. We will rise together. Words written by Arlen Cross himself. Words that every child on every world now learned by heart. Not everything healed cleanly, of course. Remnants of the Carthan horde still lurked in deep space, like cancers waiting for a chance to regrow. Some species, bitter and envious of humanity's sudden prominence, plotted in the shadows. And whispers spoke of other primarchs, older, darker ones, stirring in the void. But humanity was ready now. The tiny army was tiny no longer. Special forces groups modeled after the human vanguard appeared on every front. Multi-species battalions learned human tactics, adaptability, grit, unrelenting offense. Even alien academies began using Terran War manuals as standard texts. Where once they laughed at Earthborn soldiers, now they trained to fight like them, to think like them, to endure like them. Arlen didn't stay at the heart of politics. He never wanted parades or power. Instead, he returned to the fields of battle, but now as a mentor. He and Shara formed the First Unified Legion, a volunteer force open to all species who live by one rule. No soldier stands alone. Their recruits came from every corner of the galaxy. Broken worlds, orphan colonies, even former enemies. And under their harsh, unyielding training, these recruits became something greater than anyone expected. Not just soldiers, symbols. Proof that no matter how small you began, no matter how the galaxy mocked you, your heart, your will could change everything. In the years that followed, the legends of the tiny army only grew. Songs were sung in human taverns on distant mining worlds. Alien poets composed epic sagas about Earthborn defiance. Monuments were built, not just on Earth, but on Zervathi spires, Shisari moons, and Vaknari deep holds. The name Cross became synonymous with survival itself. The term tiny army became a badge of honor, a phrase whispered with awe. Beware the tiny army. It will never fall. And though Arlen and Shara never sought fame, history immortalized them anyway. Not as tyrants, not as conquerors, but as the stubborn fools who dared to challenge extinction and won. One evening, standing atop a rebuilt coalition bastion, Shara asked him quietly, was it worth it? Arlen, older now, scarred in ways no surgeon could mend, looked out at the stars. He saw new trade routes lit like constellations. He saw children laughing on once barren worlds. He saw enemies working side by side. He smiled, slow and certain. Every damn second. And above them, the stars burned on. Witnesses to the indomitable will of a species too stubborn, too bold, too human to ever truly die. Time passed. Decades, then centuries. The war against the Primarchs became history and then legend. And the tiny army, once dismissed and ridiculed, became myth. In the grand archives of the Shisari, scholars argued over how a primitive race had shifted galactic fate. On Vaknari deep worlds, old warriors taught their young about cross-pattern maneuvers and human siege tenacity. Across Zervathi academies, students read the Pact of the Shattered Star alongside their own sacred texts. But for all their study, for all their admiration, no one could quite capture the truth. Because humanity wasn't just strategy, or strength, or even stubbornness. It was something deeper, a refusal to bow to inevitability. A fierce, reckless hope that burned even when the skies collapsed. A hope that now infected the stars themselves. On distant frontier worlds, small rebellions sparked into full revolutions. Alien species once subjugated under cruel empires looked up at Earth's example and whispered, if the humans could rise, why not us? The Arvaxan tribes overthrew their millennia-old overlords. The Rekshi hive minds shattered their programming and chose independence. The Threx Dominion, once the strongest slaver nation in 3 sectors, crumbled under endless insurgencies fueled by Terran philosophies. Statues of old tyrants fell. Flags once seen as eternal were burned. And from the ashes, new civilizations rose, built not on fear, but on the simple, stubborn dream that anyone could be free. Humanity had not just fought a war. They had seeded a revolution that would echo for millennia. In the halls of the Coalition's capital, now permanently relocated to neutral space, an enormous mural dominated the central plaza. It depicted the first moment when humans had revealed themselves to the galaxy's armies. Small figures, dwarfed by the towering aliens around them. Yet every human in the mural stood taller, straighter, not because of size, but because of spirit. At the base of the mural, carved into indestructible void stone, a single phrase was inscribed in 1,000 languages. Do not measure us by our stature. Measure us by how we endure. Children visited the plaza on school pilgrimages, tracing the words with their fingers. Elders gathered to tell stories of the battles that saved 1,000 worlds. And across the stars, the legend of the tiny army grew. Arlen Cross never sought to return to politics. He and Shara Mendez faded from public view in the years after the war. Some said they retired to a quiet planet on the galactic rim, raising crops and children. Others swore they traveled beyond known space, seeking new worlds untouched by history's scars. The truth was never confirmed, maybe because it didn't matter. What mattered was the echo they left behind. New military academies bore Arlen's name. Peace treaties cited the human clause, a binding reminder that no people, no matter how small, should ever be dismissed again. Explorers named ships after the first fallen soldiers of the vanguard: Hale, Serrano, Upton, and more, ensuring they would sail into new stars forever remembered. And whenever new threats rose, pirates, slavers, invaders, the defenders would rally under one cry: Tiny Army, Eternal Heart. A reminder that size meant nothing. Only will did. But not all echoes were peaceful. Far beyond coalition borders, ancient forces stirred. Vast entities older than the Primarchs awakened from cold slumber. They saw the ripple humanity had caused, the changes sweeping across sectors like wildfire. And they did not approve. In the blackness between stars, monstrous ships, alive, sentient, and cruel, gathered. Species enslaved before time itself, remembered, now shuddered at the thought. If humans had shattered the Primarchs, what could they awaken next? Whispers spoke of a coming darkness, drawn by humanity's defiance. A force not just of domination, but of obliteration. The coalition prepared, forging new fleets, new alliances. But they all knew, if it came to war again, there would be no reinforcements this time. They would stand or fall on the strength of their will alone. And at the heart of every plan, every strategy, sat the same stubborn, reckless spirit humanity had gifted them. Centuries later, a lonely probe drifted beyond charted space. It carried a simple payload, an archive of humanity's history. Its final message, a beacon to any who might find it. We are humanity. We are small. We are many. We are one. We endure. The probe's signal stretched across the void, piercing the silence of dead worlds and shattered systems. And somewhere, beyond all maps and borders, something answered. A single pulsing light. A signal. A voice, impossibly old, impossibly familiar. It spoke not in words, but in memory, in shared defiance. The stars shuddered. The galaxies stirred. And across the endless night, an ancient whisper returned. Human, don't stop. The end.